This session is called Crimes of Morality. We have three sensational writers here. In the middle is Hayley Scrivenor, Dr. Hayley Scrivenor, if you please. She's the award-winning author of the widely acclaimed Dirt Creek. That is everywhere. Dirt Town, rather, not Dirt Creek, I beg your pardon. That is everywhere. Yeah. And is the former director of the Wollongong Writers Festival, to which I've never been invited. Just saying.
And it closed down. So there you go.
Yeah, wow. So, welcome, Hayley. Katherine Kovacic used to be a vet, but not happy with that doctorate, she switched professions and earned a PhD in art history. She writes both true crime and crime fiction, although she describes herself as a crazy dog lady, which sounds benign and lovely. She writes books called Just Murdered and The Schoolgirl Strangler. And chairing the panel is the legendary RWR McDonald, and he's legendary because he is the author of the much-loved and widely acclaimed The Nancies, which is The Nancies and Nancy Business. He won the Nio Marsh Award for Best First Novel for The Nancies, which is a huge achievement, because that is a proper world-class award. His most recent book is his first picture book, and it's called Happy Millionth Birthday. Is that out yet, or is that coming out?
Yeah, no.
It's out, okay.
Right now.
So I will now hand over to Rob.
Thank you very much, Robert. Hello, everyone, and hello, Hayley and Katherine. Can everyone hear okay? Yeah, beautiful. So what I thought we would start off is if both of you can just give us an overview of your latest book. For anyone who hasn't read them yet, which I'm sure would only be a very, very small minority. So Hayley, if you could give us a quick overview on what Dirt Town is about.
Well, first of all, massive thank you to you, Rob. I was really excited when I knew we would be having this conversation, and massive thanks to Port Fairy Literary Weekend for having us here. It's been such a wonderful festival. I'm really loving the programming. I've been loving all the other events I've been seeing. But Dirt Town is the story of Esther Bianchi. It's a young girl in a small country town near, I don't name it, or it's got a different name. It's a fictional place, but it's near Wagga, if you know that part of the world. And she doesn't come home from school one day. The last person who sees her is her best friend, Ronnie, which is short for Veronica. Veronica is determined to kind of bring her best friend home. She can't wrap her head around the fact that Esther might not be coming home. And it's not a spoiler to say, because we see in the opening sort of a couple of pages that Esther is not coming home. We know that there's not going to be a happy ending to this story. But it's very much about, I grew up in a small country town, and I was really interested in the ways in which that defines you and kind of makes you who you are, but also sometimes tells you who you are in a way that didn't always sit right with me as a young person, and doesn't always sit right with everybody. I think, and the sort of appeal of small town country sort of crime, which we've seen many examples of, I think, is that we all understand what it is to be isolated or to be misunderstood in a location where we would choose to be understood. It's not feeling at home in a place that should be home. So there's a number of characters that sort of allow us to see the ways in which when you take one person out of a community, everyone is kind of hurt by that or damaged by that. So yeah, and we've got a cop who comes in from out of town. Sarah Michaels is really, all of the characters, I guess, are dealing with who people think they are and how they should act. But what I love about Sarah is she is kind of the only person who I think could piece together what has happened in Durton, which the kids call Dirt Town. That's where the title comes from. I think that kind of gives you the idea. Fantastic,
thank you. And yeah, look, if you haven't read it yet, it's incredible. It's won a number of awards. It's bestseller. It's published overseas as well. So yeah, get into it. Katherine, Seven Sisters. Can you tell us a bit about that, please?
I can. Seven Sisters is about a group of women who meet at a therapy session, and each one of the women has lost a sister through domestic violence, and they're all very upset and they're all very angry. And this is a bit of an unusual therapist leading their sessions, and so they come up with a plan to redress the balance, because none of the perpetrators got proper justice. They all got away with it in one way or another, short sentences, completely got away with it. So these women hatch a plan to redress the balance by swapping murders in a rather Hitchcockian fashion and taking out the original perpetrators. So that's the setup, and then we're kind of away, and it's will they get away with it? How are they going to do it? And of course there's a cop, because there always has to be a cop. So will the cop get onto them before they finish getting through the list? That's it in a nutshell. I think that's probably all you need.
Excellent, thank you. And yes, it's a brilliant page-turner of a book. It's been shortlisted for a number of awards as well. Yeah, Seven Sisters, get into it. So, I thought to begin, it was important to channel my 11-year-old debating self and start with a definition of moral ambiguity, which is Seven Sisters by Katherine Kovacic. So a lack of certainty about whether something is right or wrong. And I wanted to ask you both about exploring moral ambiguity in your own writing, and whether you see this as an essential element these days in crime fiction. So Hayley, I'll start with you. Is moral ambiguity something you consciously thought about when you were writing Dirt Town?
Oh, absolutely. And I think as a young person and both as a reader, I'm always on the side of whoever's narrating. Even, like Lolita, I get sucked in by whoever's telling the story, and I want things to be all right for them. So that's one element. But I think from a child, I was concerned with this idea that I seemed to be easily swayed by whoever was in front of me. I felt like I lacked a kind of a quality I admired, which was a real sense of the ability to hold fast to what you think is true. And then as I got into writing, I realised that ability to sort of seep into the cracks of someone else's understanding of the world and see the world the way they see the world, because no one is the villain in their own story, really. It kind of flipped it, and it felt like it became a strength that I could hold my mind open and kind of hold multiple possible takes on the same thing. This was a space where that was going to be okay, and in fact that was going to help me do and go into things that would make my writing better. So I'm really interested in this idea of, with every character, I think you have to find what misbelief they might be carrying around about the world, and in a good story I think the plot acts upon that misbelief. So in the case of Dirt Town, we've got Ronnie, who is this lovely kid, loves her best friend, and really believes that something bad can't have happened to her. And of course the story is going to act upon her in a way where we see that bad things can happen, and she will be really changed by that experience. We've also got the character of Lewis, and the thing about morality is we think of it as an absolute, or am I a good or a bad person? But in the context of growing up queer in a country town, I think morality becomes really life or death. Are you okay in the morality of where you live? And are you kind of a good person, and are you going to be okay? So I think the book really grew out of that sense of shame that I felt as a queer kid in a country town, of is this this life or death question of am I right in this space? And so I think we think of it as purely a question of good or evil, right? But I think it's more, are the values of the people around me safe for us to live together? And I think that question continues to drive my writing, and I'm really interested in that. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. And Katherine, same question for you when you were writing Seven Sisters.
Okay, the risk of making myself sound really slightly psycho. No, I didn't actually come to... When I started writing this, I wasn't thinking about the morality or the moral ambiguity of it. I was thinking about the characters, and I was thinking about sucking the readers in to come along with those characters and wanting the readers to be on that side and working and rooting for the murderers rather than for, the victims. The police character is kind of became more of a character than I intended, and she has that sort of she walks that line, so she gives you that moral compass, and you wonder which side she's ultimately going to come over to. But I think for me, this, part of this actually came from that idea that I'm sure we've all seen those headlines where there's been a domestic violence murder and someone gets a very short sentence, they get it pled down to manslaughter. It all kind of gets glossed over. Even the headlines that don't really address that a woman has been murdered, it'll say something about Blue Mountain's death, shock twist or something. So it's nothing to do with the Blue Mountains, and it's not a shock twist. It's a man murdered a woman in a domestic violence situation. So I wanted to sort of put that level of anger and glossing over. I wanted to bring that to the surface. So that was kind of what I was doing. So that for me, I guess that ambiguity came into making readers want to be on that side of getting into things.
Which you do brilliantly, and to the point where you're reading the book and you're going, but they're actually, killing people, and I want them to get away with it, which is
I wanted them to succeed so badly, really, and you're aware that you're not necessarily rooting for the side of like, do unto others or whatever, that basic principle, but it's fantastic the way you pull us into that.
Absolutely. So we've seen an increase in the morally grey characters, so the bad cop, the good thief, although you could say these characters have been around for a long time, particularly the anti-hero. And why ask one question when you can ask two? That doesn't count as rhetorical. Do you see there are more flawed protagonists these days in crime fiction? Are these morally ambiguous characters moving from antagonist to protagonist? Katherine. Oh.
No, you go.
Are there more morally flawed characters? I don't know. I mean, you could go back and say, well, let's say Robin Hood, for example. Robin Rich gives the poor. If you're in Brighton, you're probably not thinking that he's, a great guy, but if you're down in sort of a little struggle street place, you're probably thinking he is a good guy. And I guess Lupin, has anyone watched the new Netflix series of Lupin? So that's based on Maurice Leblanc's 1905 thing about Arsène Lupin, gentleman thief, who is going around ripping people off, but good things happen, because he's there. So are they more morally? I don't know that they are. Perhaps it's a case that we're writing deeper characters, more real characters, more multi-dimensional characters. So no one's perfect. We just get to see more sides of them, and as writers we get to play with those sides in greater depth, I think. So I think that's perhaps more what we're seeing rather than a new shade of character.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a cliche, but we all contain contradictions within ourselves, and so I think when you read a character that has, one thing and also another thing that would seem to be in conflict with each other. So in the case of my cop character, I really truly believe she's deeply committed to finding women and children, and that's an honourable life's work. I think that is something that she works very hard to do and she's good at doing. And yet within her own personal relationships, there is this inability, and something has happened to her in her own sort of immediate past that allows her to understand how thin that veil is between being the right person on the right side and kind of tipping over into the kind of person that is not on the right side. And I think the enduring fascination of crime is that we all kind of know we're probably capable of quite a lot if exactly the wrong thing were to happen in exactly the wrong order. I mean, that's what I love about, I think why I was drawn to crime as a genre is this idea of, I feel like I write from an emotional place that's almost like I've emotionally stubbed my toe. Like I'm sitting there going, like it hurts. There's something that is a big, all-encompassing feeling. And then what crime allows me to do is apply stakes that are life or death to that. So it's like the source isn't necessarily life or death. I never knew someone who went missing. It's like writing from that emotion and then putting over the stakes and characters who will have to be pushed in this belief they have about how the world works or who they are to breaking point. I think there's something endlessly fascinating about that. And I love reading it in other people's books. Yeah.
Yeah, so just on that, what do you think makes these characters so compelling and enduring? Is it that the reader can identify that this person isn't perfect and, you know, is going to make mistakes, and you're sort of rooting for them not to. Is it that sort of engagement, or what do you think is?
I mean, I think perfection is boring. And also, sometimes you'll get people say, like, why did they do that? And you go, babe, I know, like, I didn't want them to do it either. It was dumb. They should not have done it. And yet, there would be no story without that sort of... And I think it's almost a place where we can watch things play out and know that we're okay, and that whatever happens... I think we feel like we can learn from those mistakes, and yet we can't. Like, the tragedy of being a human being and being alive is that you can never make the right decision all the time, because we never know the knock-on effects of what we're doing. So I feel like you're just trying to grapple with that reality in a way. And so when you have a character who can almost be your representative on the field of the story, you can maybe find a bit of grace for them when they do the wrong thing, and maybe that helps you find grace for yourself. I feel that as a writer. I feel like I end up loving my characters and offering them grace, and then realising, like, oh, maybe there could be, like, enough grace to go around for everybody, and that could be a good thing. Yeah.
I think with Seven Sisters, the thing that's really been interesting is people saying to me, you know, I thought about how far I would go. I thought about what would make me do that. And then I thought about how I'd do it if I was doing it. So I think that's been really interesting, it's made people think about what they would do, where their moral line sits, and particularly in terms of family and loved ones, how far they'd be prepared to go to save someone or protect someone or potentially avenge someone. So that's been the really interesting one about this. But I agree with Hayley that idea of the flawed character, and, you know, sometimes it's, you know, if it's a movie, it's that closed doorway at the end of a long hall and the music's gone into a minor key, and you know there's not going to be anything good down behind that doorway, but you know that stupid character is still going to go down there and open that door anyway. So I think there's that too, that we have that sort of, oh, please don't, but please do, because we want to see what happens.
Yes. Sometimes I wish I could hear the minor key playing in my own life, you know, like no, listen to the soundtrack, Hayley, go the other way, take the stairs.
Love that. For me, I just a character, I love Luther. Does everyone know Luther? Yeah. Who has his own ethics code, but especially Alice Morgan, who is very villainous and does the occasional good thing, but also believes she's above mortal concepts such as justice and the law. Do you have any crime fiction favourite characters that occupy the moral ambiguous space?
That's really tricky. I don't know. I can't think of any in books. I mean, sort of said Arsène Lupin, but Dexter on television is another one who's, you know, the serial killer who kills serial killers. But I mean, really, most characters have that moral flaw. There's one that I quite like, who's a necromancer, you know, but that's perhaps not quite for this room. I don't know. We can talk about this later, folks.
I love, and I don't think she's a morally flawed character necessarily, but Danuka Mackenzie's Detective Sergeant Kate Miles. What I love about her is that she's constantly evaluating and kind of finding herself wanting, and so she feels like she's failing both at being a police officer and a mother. And the great thing about that first book is, instead of the ticking time bomb being she's going to retire or whatever, it's that she's heavily pregnant, right? And so she's trying to please too many people. Like, she can't kind of be there for her partner and do her job well and kind of ready herself for birth. This is real. And I love, because it is an impossible situation. And so you're watching her just trying to do the best that she can. And again, it comes back to that. That's what I like, is that character being able to, they're responding to something fairly impossible that I also wouldn't know what to do in that situation. So I have some compassion for them while they're, I think those are the characters you really, that stick with you. You're like, oh, that was an impossible choice. Like, what else were you supposed to do? Yeah.
Actually thinking, if anyone's read Mick Herron's Slow Horses series, it's an entire cast of morally ambiguous people, and it's a revolving cast because he has no compunction about killing them off between the books. So it's set up as a branch of MI5 where all the duds have gone, which is why they're called the Slow Horses. And so they're all there for a reason. Either they've left the secret file on the train, or they've completely stuffed up the training operation and basically sent half London into lockdown or something like that. So they're all there. They're all duds. They've all got baggage, and then they all have to kind of and the guy who heads the unit. Let's talk about morally flawed characters, and he's a disgusting character too. He's I'll say it, the belching, farting, drinking kind of guy, and everyone's quite repulsed by him, and yet he gets the job done, and the team gets the job done, even if one of them does get killed along the way or maimed. Yes, there was maiming. But they're great books to read.
Fantastic, thank you, Katherine. We thought we would just have a short reading from you both.
You've got the microphone already.
Yeah, fantastic. So,
this will be very short. Seven Sisters is a difficult book to read from picking it up somewhere in the middle and not giving too much away. So I'm just going to give you the prologue, which is probably the goriest bit of the whole book. So here we go. The handle of the carving knife was slippery in her palm. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the body. Suddenly his eyes flew open, his chest rose, blood bubbled at his lips, and he made a wet, sucking sound. She looked at the knife in her hand, back at the man on her lounge. When he pulled in another breath, she could see the effort it cost him. Seconds passed, or was it minutes? She became aware of sirens in the distance, getting louder. Leaning close, she watched as he registered her face. Then she raised the knife and plunged in a second time, feeling it glance off bone before finding the softness between two ribs. His eyes widened, his body arching. She yanked out the knife and flung it aside. Behind her, a floorboard creaked.
I feel bad because I picked a 3-minute reading, and now it'll feel really endlessly long to everyone after that amazing sort of short, sharp stab in the ribs, as it were. All right. Summer hadn't even officially begun, and this is from the point of view of my Greek chorus, which we might talk about a little bit, but it's I imagine it as all the children in the town under a certain age that are kind of speaking together in this almost like a traditional Greek chorus, but made of Aussie school kids. Summer hadn't even officially begun, and the town already felt like skin reddened and burned by the sun until it peeled. Heat radiated from the concrete of the main street. The paint on the news agency curled from its walls. Chips of it drifted on the wind, dotting the road with little white specks as far as the school. There was a fish and chip shop. Only one of our fathers said you couldn't call it a fish and chip shop if it was more than 300 kilometres from the ocean. So we called it the chip shop, or sometimes the Chico shop. We felt the heat and smelled the fryers bubbling as water from our swimmers dripped onto the linoleum floor and the owner handed over our ice creams. Durton had 2 churches. One of them had a hall attached, and on certain weeknights we gathered around the Girl Guide banner one of the mothers brought in and pledged our allegiance to the Queen, although we'd never met her. Once Ronnie Thompson scoffed a whole box of the fundraising cookies when no one was looking and wasn't allowed back. Esther Bianchi quit in protest. On weekends, the other church would host the youth group where we were coaxed into accepting Jesus' love with jam donuts and lukewarm lemonade. There was another train track that ran past the outskirts of the showground. It had been built by the wheat company that at one point had owned most of the land around that area. No more trains would ever run there, but everyone still slowed to check nothing was coming before passing over, out of habit. There was a distinction between our little town and the bigger one up the highway. Our parents made the same word sound different, and we learned from them to say town with a certain capitalising emphasis when we meant the place that involved a 25-minute drive, squashed in a car with no aircon. In town, capital T town, there was a cinema and a Kmart and a Rivers. There was a racecourse too, and sometimes we begged our father to take us to see the horses. If you want to go to capital T town, you need to be good and stop being so mean to your little brother. We kids had our own name for Durton, Dirt Town. Nobody knew who'd said it first. Someone must have thought of the idea, holding the pun aloft like a shiny marble in the playground. But by the time we started school, it was just what everybody said. Not with malice or even affection, only in a way that showed we had never thought about the place we lived in terms of good or bad. Our town wasn't a choice for us, it just was.
Excellent. Thank you both very much. Audience, I'll be opening up for questions after this question. So, yeah, please just let us know if you have any questions. I've got plenty of questions if you're shy. And, I wanted to ask you both a writing question, which is, how can moral ambiguity be used to mislead or hoodwink the reader, build tension and narrative drive?
Something that I think is really interesting is if you can try and turn readers' prejudices back on themselves by the way you portray a character. So if you portray a character as seeming nasty or perhaps a bit icky towards children or something like that, or just some way in which, I would have said in the past, if I look at Golden Age crime, Agatha Christie, I would have said the queer character. Someone who's overly effeminate, or the woman wearing trousers, that person who's out of place. And the audience for that time, when homosexuality was still a crime, that's instantly someone who's suspect. A way to turn the reader's prejudices back on themselves and think, it's got to be that character, because they're the one that's out of place, that's over the top with their gestures or what have you. So that's a really interesting way. But otherwise, obviously, in terms of our protagonists when we're writing, having that will they, won't they, the what if, that can they put aside their own prejudices or their own problem and do what needs to be done. And so that's part of the hook and the suspense of, will we get through this crossroads, and will they take the right direction? So those are probably the two big ones. And then there's all sorts of little grey areas with the side cast, the extra characters and things. Oh gosh, we could talk about this for a long time, couldn't we? It's quite endless. And even it's very easy to have a question, the good option, the bad option. But if you've got two bad options, if it's save the little old lady from the speeding car, or stop 5 people around the corner from being killed because you need to be there. So those are the kind of ambiguous questions that you can, I'm going to have to say that you can have a lot of fun with, but don't take me the wrong way, folks, when you're writing things.
We're always sort of gleeful crime writers, aren't we? Like, we're all very happy and kind of like, and there's that thing where it's like, oh no, that's right, we kill people, and we, and every so often I'll do a book club or something, and they sort of go, but why have you done this, And I think it comes back to that idea of it lets you explore those bigger questions about what it means to feel and be alive, and to be concerned about making the right choice and doing the right thing, right? And I think I talked about at the beginning, writing from that place of the stubbed toe emotionally. Like I have this feeling and I don't know where to put it other than to... But what I've loved about crime, and why I think it's a genre I'll continue to write in, is this wonderful sense of everything you give the reader has to kind of be leading them somewhere, ultimately. Like in crime fiction, you know that you're learning things, and that ultimately, unlike in life, they are going to come together and they're going to kind of pay off. And what a really beautiful and really alert crime story does is kind of give you all the information you need for the ending to be surprising and yet totally inevitable in hindsight, because you've been told multiple times that that's the nature of reality in that world, but you didn't realise that that was going to be... an example is, I'm reading The Silent Patient. I don't know if anyone's read that book, and I don't want to give away the twist, but you're being told something about what a certain experience would do to a person, and then at the end you're like, oh, but that's, okay, like now that I know, you've been telling me that from the beginning, that might have negative consequences if that were to happen to a person, but it's just not the person that I thought it was happening to. And so I think the rigour that crime gives me as a writer is really holding everything up to the light and saying, does the reader need to know this? Why am I making them kind of sit through this? And for me, I'm a sentence writer. Like I love language. I labour over the sentences, but I love the rigour of cutting what is not going to help people come to grips with the kind of reality that ultimately I want the story to present to them. So it goes from that scream place of like emotion through to, no, all of this is a closed system, and you're going to be able to close this book and not necessarily have every question answered, but kind of know what was the outcome and how it affected everyone. And yeah, I don't know. I think I wandered off from your question, but
I like that. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Hayley, have you got a new book in the works?
Are you from my publisher? Are you a plant? It's really funny. I've been talking to a lot of writers this weekend, which again is just the joy of a literary weekend like this. You have no idea what it is to be someone who spends their time in their pajamas all day and then get to come and be around people that you know are brilliant and funny and smart and love the same thing you do. And if you'd asked me 3 weeks ago, I would have been very coy about book 2 because I was in that stage. I call it Schrodinger's manuscript, where it's either alive or dead and you really hope it's alive. But there's every chance that when someone else, I don't share my work a lot now because I have a sense of trying to close the system. Like I know what I'm trying to do, and once I feel like I can't do that on my own anymore, that's when I hand it over, whereas I used to be a lot more open. So there was this real sense of like, God, I hope the cat's alive. Like, and you're listening at the box, like trying to hear. And then I got some wonderful feedback, and the cat is alive. And so my due date is still it would be to come out in November next year. So that's all I will say about that. It's not a sequel. It's not the same characters, but it has a similar interest in, I guess, the way the people around us define us. But I'm also really interested in this question of like, how do you know that you are not the crazy one in a given situation? Because that question is really fascinating to me. So yeah, that'll be the next book.
Excellent.
I just have to say that when you're travelling, there's always a crazy person on the trip with you, and if you can't pick the crazy person,
Excellent. Yes, please.
As a crime writer, how important is it for you to explore the psychology in some rather deep fashion of the criminal?
I think it depends on the story you're writing. So I did a true crime one that I went into quite great research for. This is a historic true crime, so I couldn't talk to anyone about it, couldn't see anything but I wanted to understand the psychopathy of what was going on there. So that was a lot of research for that, and a lot of talking to people in the profession to get my head around what sort of a person was going to carry out those crimes. In terms of writing crimes, certainly I've done research when I wanted to have a particular mindset for the criminal. So it just depends, because I think, yeah, if you're going into that sort of, and also the perspective that you're going to be writing from, because if you're not going to really see much of that character until the end, or you don't need to go into the motive as much, then you don't need to kind of have that mindset. And then you can also have that thing of, we're in a fictional world too, so long as you can not write yourself into a corner and explain your actions to the reader, you can play around with things a bit.
Yeah, one of the only difficult things about being a crime writer is that you can't talk about your endings, and so you often can't talk about the person who you've spent a lot of time thinking about why they would do what they do. Like, it's not something you get to talk about at this kind of event, and it's always nice when you go to a book club and they have read the book and you can delve into that, because I certainly personally think about it a lot, but it comes back to what I said earlier of you can tell people early in the book factors that are going to ultimately explain something that this person that I can't tell you who it is, why they did what they did. And so you're trying to do that in ways where it's not noticeable to you, but at the end you go, oh, I kind of understand in this situation with that set of experiences why that person would act that way. And I do believe you have to find a way to inhabit every character and work backwards from what has happened and what it might take to kind of to tip that person over. So I think about it a lot, but don't always get to talk about it a lot because of the spoiler-free nature of the way we have to talk about our books.
Yeah, and I think there's that thing of unless you've got a psychiatrist or some kind of character that's going to diagnose the killer, say, you sort of want to be. You don't want to be labelling people necessarily, but absolutely the amount of research around behaviours and how that could present. So if we're talking about a psychopath or a sociopath or narcissist, so you can absolutely imbue that in your character without having to even say those words, right?
I think also that even with all the research as much as you've done, at the end of the day, it's about being in your own characters' heads. And as Hayley said, you sort of get to know all your characters as you're writing. And so you get to the point where you start, I've done a couple of times, I've written something and thought, oh no, she wouldn't do that. And because you know who your characters are and what they'll do. And then with this book, there was one point where one of my editors said, oh, they're going on a long drive. Why aren't they listening to an audiobook or some music or something like that? And I said, oh, they're actually on their way to kill someone right now. So it's not sort of an audiobook kind of moment. But it made perfect sense to me. And then she went, oh, okay, I see what you're doing there. So that was a good moment for me and my editor. We sort of bonded a bit then. So I think just the more you're writing, the more you're understanding your own characters. So it's a matter of translating that to the readers in the page.
That's great. I have another question for you. Crime fiction, by its very nature, contains violence, as we've been talking about. Someone usually dies, and badly. When writing your stories, how much violence is too much, and where do you draw the line? Or is there any line you wouldn't cross?
Don't kill the dog. Again, it's going to depend on the nature of the book and the nature of the criminal. And I don't like to write like shocking scenes for the sake of shocking. So it has to feel right for. That sounds very weird. We have to kill them the right way for the story. But yeah, you don't necessarily need to have someone revving their chainsaw and blood splatter up the walls to achieve your end as a crime writer. So, but certainly animals. Yeah, I wouldn't be killing any animals or maiming any animals. But there's something about that that's just next level.
A step too far.
And Hayley.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a website, I can't remember the name, but it will generate a series of warnings of content that's in your book. And it was really interesting. I was like, shit, that's a long list. And I hope I don't come across as a violent person, and I don't think of myself as, I'm incredibly optimistic and usually happy to meet people where they are, and I don't enjoy watching violence. I still don't particularly enjoy reading violence. And one of the hard things of being a crime writer and going to wonderful events, and then I've just realised I have to read the books for panels sort of in the morning. There is a morning time where I can read crime, and then it sort of gets to a point where it's too late in the day and I can't, because I'm a massive wuss. That's the hilarious part of it. I'm not, you have this image of, if you are a crime writer, I'll be there in my leather jacket, smoking my Marlboro, I'll be really tough. And I'm just not. I'm a big marshmallow, and I like to think that there is nothing gratuitous in Dirt Town in terms of coming back to that psychology question of, I didn't set out to write a lot of the things that were in the book, but once I was thinking about the people and why they might make certain decisions, you don't have to dig very far, particularly in this kind of small community, I think, to find violence and to find trauma and absence where there should have been abundance, in all these different ways. And so there are scenes where I depict certain kinds of violence, but I try and give you the minimum to feel what I need you to feel for that person, or to help understand. But I really don't want to linger in it if I don't have to. But then some people, reading Michael Winkler's Grimish, for example, that has some completely astonishing. I was reading it on a plane last weekend. And I was making noise and I had my mouth open. I was the crazy person on the transport, right? But it was so affecting, and so it felt ultimately worth it, because it was what Michael was inviting me to think about was the nature of pain and the nature of how we get through and deal with pain. And so as a reader, I was very happy to get on board. But if it just feels like it's happening because it would look cool or whatever, then I'm less accepting or want to do that less, yeah.
So you would kill the dog?
Look, one kitten gets microwaved in Dirt Town, and I'm really sorry. But it's not... you don't see it happen, but it's one of those things where, I heard that as a 9-year-old. Someone said, did you hear that so-and-so's cousin did this? And I really hope that it never happened. I hope it was just one of those things. But it's one of those images that once you hear it, you can kind of never... I'm sorry. So that's it. That's the trigger warning for the book. Is that it very much in passing someone mentions this idea. Well, yeah, so I'm sorry. Future editions we can. It's really like it's that thing though of rumour and often the imagined violence or the. It's enough to just say to someone to be like, oh, imagine if that happened, or did you hear about that happening? You don't need to show it. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
Can I ask you about the relationship between place and morality? I mean, places, and including your own description, I think, of your book, place is very important, giving credibility to the story. And yet the moral standards can be very different between, even within Australia, but between Australia and other countries.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always afraid that I sort of come out and like, this will sound dumb, but it wasn't until the book was out and people were talking about it that I realised that calling my book Dirt Town may not sound like the most positive reflection on like Australian small town life. It has this innately negative kind of connotation. And as much as I've talked about violence and all the things that are happening for my characters, actually, I mean, I think any place has both joys and sorrows. Any place has positive and negative things about living there. And I think in terms of what setting the book where it was set allowed me to do is it allowed me to write it because I felt like I knew that place. And so as a beginner writer, I at least had something to be getting on with while I was figuring out other elements of plot and character that I needed to learn and become a better writer. I spent 6 years writing this book. But knowing that I was grounding it in a place that I knew made it easier from like a practical point of view. And the last thing I want to do is suggest that bad things only happen in small country towns because it's not true. And I think now I'm older, I can see the value of opting into a small community where you show up for each other and everyone knows each other's name. And but it just, for these characters and this book, it was that kind of place and it just had to be. But I certainly don't want to be like trashing small towns at all. Unfortunately, Dirt Town may not sort of, it doesn't suggest that, but yeah.
Do you want to say
No.
Seven Sisters didn't have such a strong sense of place as this, but I'm always very aware of place as almost a character in story. So having said that, Seven Sisters is the first of my books that I've set in Sydney, and I lived up there for a couple of years, and I specifically wanted to set this one in Sydney because to me Sydney always came across as a very bright, glitzy, brash city that was always sparkly on the surface. There's, literally the light on the water, it's a sparkly city, and they see themselves as very sparkly. And so I really wanted that contrast with the dirt of every day and the dirt of killing people beneath that glitz. So,
Yeah.
And I think sometimes a city lets you talk about isolation in exactly the same way. In the same way you can move a body in a dark field, you might be able to move a body in a suburban street where...
so many ways to move a body.
So many ways to move a body, yeah. That should have been the title of this event. Yeah.
Love it. Yes.
Just have to say, Woolworths and Coles trucks, people.
You got to watch Katherine Kovacic.
I really love the voice of the children in your book. It's fantastic. How old? To me, they feel like about 7, 8. Is that what you intended, or did you want to leave that to the reader's imagination?
It's kind of all the kids 12 and under is how I imagined it. So you would have much younger in there and older. And as you go into little individual experiences, sometimes you're in the big sister who's like punching a little brother, and sometimes you are the little brother. So they're all in there. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I'll come out. Hear from a lot of crime writers that you're either a plotter or a pantser. You've got it all figured out before you start, or you're just going all about setting pants. Where do you guys fit today?
My old joke is what everyone else gets to wear pants. Like I'm not even flying by the seat of my pants. I'm flying by, the better answer than that bad joke, which 50-50, like sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't. It's like how comfortable people are imagining me without pants on. But Isabel Carmody has this great line that she's not, so for, people either are plotters because they plot the book or fly by the seat of their pants, but she says, I'm a panther, I stalk my story, and so that idea of being an endurance hunter, like something is there and it exists and I'm trying to capture it and there is something vital and alive. And in capturing it, I will wear down some of that vitality, and yet that doesn't mean that I shouldn't keep going, and it is a long and sort of enduring process. That is how I think about how I write books. So I really love the panther. I really want to add that as a third option on the form of plotter, panther.
I really like that too, and now this is going to sound really banal. Rob knows this. I have a bad sat nav. So remember those old navman things? I know where I'm going to end up, and I know a couple of the things I'm going to see along the way. But then when I plot it into my writing navman, you know, I'm cruising along. We're on the M1. It's all going beautifully, 100 k's an hour, and then suddenly that stupid thing says, "In 200 metres, turn left." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" Turn left. So I always turn left because there's some really interesting things on the turn-offs sometimes, and there's really good places to bury bodies. And sometimes it's also like 10,000 words down the drain, but if my characters tell me to turn left, we turn left, and we still ultimately end up at our destination, but it just gets interesting along the way.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
How do you decide between an open paragraph versus a prologue? Do you write it early or do you write it in the end?
I have had to reconcile myself to when I first start off, my first draft, I now know that first sentence and first paragraph are going to be crap. And I have to write through it. So the prologue for Seven Sisters came after I'd written the whole book because I knew I needed something else there. But usually, you know, you have an idea of where you're going, so you've kind of just got to get yourself into it. So, and prologues, it's a different vibe in a prologue. So it just depends on the nature of the story as to whether that goes in or whether you're just straight off and into the action.
I sort of, it's funny, I definitely wrote what would be the opening of the book, which is a kind of flash forward in time to finding the body. So we knew that the horrible event had already happened, and so it's more of a why and a whodunit than like a what has happened type mystery. And I was really, I had to write the whole book, I think, to write that scene. And it was the quickest thing I wrote. It came out pretty much as it was, and I really loved it. And the publisher loved it too, but they said, "Oh, but people are a bit funny about prologues." This was their belief, that people have sometimes skipped them or don't like them. And I went, "Oh, I have a brilliant idea." And they went, "What?" I went, "What if we just don't call it a prologue?" So I kind of got to keep this piece of writing that I do think enters you into the story in the way that best serves the story that I'm trying to tell, and hopefully doesn't put off people that hate the word prologue. But that is definitely, like, there's no way it's not a prologue, like, it, you know, that jump forward in time and things. But I think that sense of, I love that, sometimes that keystone feeling of I had to know everybody in this book and know everything that was going to happen to know that this is what the opening had to be. And I think anything that makes it easier to keep writing, like saying, okay, I can come back and do the beginning once I know more about the story, is very helpful. For anything you can do to make your life easier as a writer, I think will help in the sustainability of actually finishing a project. I think being kind to yourself becomes actually a really good method of working, because it means you're less likely to sort of flame out and stop, which would be the real sadness is to stop, yeah.
Absolutely. Any other questions? All right. Well, I've got a final question. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned through writing novels?
It's that kindness, actually. I was so filled with a sense of the way that I spoke to myself. Like, if I was someone's boss, I would have been taken to some kind of court. You know, it was kind of like, you idiot. Like, why do you think that left turn would work? You know, why did you think that following that character, you know, and writing, because I wrote over 300,000 words to become a 100,000 word novel. But I realised when I was able to flip into what I think of gentle curiosity, like, what would happen if we did this, rather than, yeah, let's try that, you dumb idiot. You know, like, things, not surprisingly, got better. So that's the biggest lesson that I had to learn, that actually beating myself up and trying for perfection and for my idea of what I thought the story should be was not as good ultimately for the reader at the other end than when I just kind of came into it saying, well, let's see what happens if we follow this.
And so did that translate into when you started writing your next book?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can see that train of thinking a lot more now. I also just think other people have like much harder jobs than that. You know, if all I have to contend with is that continual calming of the mind, I think that's the ongoing work of being a writer. You have to find a way to live with yourself, and you know, I do love the work ultimately, and I sometimes worry when I talk about that it doesn't come across, but this is the most meaningful and heart-filling thing that I could ever imagine being allowed to do. And so I would like to enjoy it a bit more of the time than I did with Dirttown, because ultimately I think that writing has changed my life and opened me up. Like, the words of other people have given me so much solace. And so, yeah, it comes back to that idea of there's plenty of grace to go around, and maybe I could give a bit of that too. I'm working on it. I do think it has been better. There's been less like, now you listen here, Scrivener, like you drop and give me 20 similes, you know. Like.
Do you think it's because you're getting to kill people on the page now that you're being kinder to yourself? Yeah. Obviously, I'm going to sound a bit psycho now. No, look, I've learned a lot of things. I've learned how much I like writing, because having done lots of other things, you know, I'd forgotten how much I liked words and just playing with words. I've discovered stories everywhere, and I think it's tuned me in more to listening to people again, and probably eavesdropping on people again, but that's something else entirely. And the power of the phrase "what if," I think that's the biggest thing, that you can just, you know, you can take any situation and you just think, oh, but what if that happened instead? And so that's been one of the biggest things I think I've learned, which sounds very simple, but just, you know, that you can twist anything and find a story. That, and this really interesting paper on the number of people that died when coconuts fell on them. But that was it doesn't end up in any books, because it wasn't very much fun really. But I just thought that was a cartoon thing. But apparently a lot of people die from having coconuts fall on them, so it's a sidebar.
Thank you. That's excellent. All right. Well, please join hands and thank Katherine and Hayley and Dirttown, Seven Sisters. If you haven't read them, they're fantastic. Thank you both so much.
And thank you, Rob. You're a legend, a living legend. Thank you.